We've moved a quarter-mile west. We're now standing on the western arm of McPherson Ridge, not far from the bronze statue of General John Buford, commander of the 2,700 Union cavalry that arrived at Gettysburg on June 30th. By the end of the day on June 30th, John Buford has sent out scouts not only to the west, but to the north and northeast as well, and he has enough information to convince him that the entire Confederate Army is beginning to converge in the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. John Buford also knows that 10,000 Union infantrymen, the First Corps of the Army of the Potomac, led by Major General John Fulton Reynolds, has orders to proceed to Gettysburg the next day. The question for John Buford is, what does he do now? Buford will make the decision to try to delay the Confederate advance on July 1st as long as he can, to buy enough time for John Reynolds and the Union infantrymen to arrive in town and decide what to do. But John Buford knows, most likely, he'll be outnumbered. He only has 2,700 men, and his men are cavalrymen, not infantrymen. They're not meant for a stand-up fight. Furthermore, his cavalrymen are not armed with rifle muskets, but rather carbines. They can be loaded and fired more rapidly, but they don't have the effective range and killing power that a standard rifle musket does. Furthermore, John Buford is going to fight his men, if he has to, dismounted. That means every fourth man will have to hold the horses of his comrades, further weakening his battle line. But Buford intends, if he has to use the terrain of Gettysburg to his advantage. Now we're standing on the western arm of McPherson Ridge. Behind you, behind the camera, is the eastern arm of McPherson Ridge, and beyond that, closer to the town of Gettysburg, is Oak Ridge. Behind me, a quarter mile to the west, you might be able to see a prominent red barn roof and a tree line. That marks Hers Ridge. Buford intends to deploy his men on Hers Ridge, and as Confederate infantry march down the Chambersburg Pike towards Gettysburg, the same road you can see behind me, they'll run into Buford's cavalrymen. Buford's cavalrymen will put up a fight. If they're driven back, they'll simply mount up and head to McPherson Ridge. If they're driven off that, they'll fall back again to the eastern arm of McPherson Ridge, and if they're driven off that, well, they'll fall back to Oak Ridge. Again, buying time, delaying the Confederate advance, and that's exactly what happens in the morning hours of July 1st, 1863. About a half a mile down the road in front of Hers Ridge is the most advanced picket post of Buford's cavalry division. It's led by a young lieutenant from Illinois named Marcellus Jones. And around 7 o'clock in the morning, as Lieutenant Jones looks down the Chambersburg Pike towards the west, he sees the first of those 7,000 Confederate infantrymen moving down the road towards the town of Gettysburg. And Marcellus Jones believes that a great battle could be fought here. It could be a battle that decides the fate of the Republic, and Lieutenant Jones wants to be the man that fires the first shot of the Battle of Gettysburg. He borrows a carbine from a man beside him, levels that carbine on a fence post, lines up the sight to the first Confederate officer coming down the road, draws the hammer back, pulls the trigger, and fires the first shot of the Battle of Gettysburg, the first shot of millions that would be fired over the next 3 days. As these Confederate infantrymen under General Henry Heath slam into Buford's cavalrymen, they have to leave the road. They have to deploy and form battle lines and then move forward to drive the cavalrymen off. Well, that buys a lot of time. But once these Confederate soldiers advance, they drive back Buford's cavalrymen. Confederates initially think they're victorious until they march a little bit further down the road and run into another line of cavalrymen here on McPherson Ridge. Again, these Confederate infantrymen are forced to leave the road, form battle lines, move forward. When they do, they run into Buford's cavalrymen again, and they quickly brush them off. But Buford's cavalrymen, they simply fall back again to the next ridge behind the camera, the eastern arm of McPherson Ridge, and renew the fight. By this point, it's roughly 10 o'clock in the morning on July 1st, 1863, and John Buford is desperately awaiting the arrival of Major General John Reynolds and his First Corps infantrymen. And around 10:30, Reynolds finally makes his arrival on the battlefield. Reynolds' infantrymen will essentially take over from Buford's cavalrymen, and Reynolds will deploy the brigade of Lysander Cutler, mostly men from New York and Pennsylvania, on McPherson Ridge, north of the Chambersburg Pike, roughly where we're standing, and he'll deploy the Iron Brigade, some of the best soldiers in the Army of the Potomac, to the south of the Chambersburg Road in what is today called Reynolds Woods. Often it's referred to as Herbst Woods. The arrival of the First Corps will inaugurate a new phase of the Battle of Gettysburg. Confederate infantrymen all morning had been encountering cavalry, and they've been able to drive them off. Now, within sight of the town of Gettysburg itself, these Confederate soldiers think one more attack and we'll command the town. Well, when they advance, not only do they not command the town, they run into Union infantry, again, some of the best in the Union Army. John Reynolds will be on the battlefield for maybe 30 minutes. As he's leading the men of the Iron Brigade into Reynolds Woods, He's shot and hit at the base of the neck by a Confederate bullet. It kills him instantly. One man who saw Reynolds fall would note that he never saw a bullet do his work so quickly. Reynolds was dead before he hit the ground. Around noon, a lull will settle over the battlefield. Both sides will draw back, replenish ammunition, and figure out what to do next.